Welcome to the Peachtree Podcast. Peachtree Learning Center is a nonprofit in Middle Tennessee dedicated to training and discipling students in all the fine arts to become excellent and skilled in order to spread the kingdom of God into the world of the arts. On this podcast, we will discuss topics designed to encourage, uplift, educate, and equip people to proclaim the kingdom more deeply in their own families and communities. Welcome back to Peachtree's podcast for this week. We're in the throes of our fall semester and have had a great start to the time together in both of our spaces. We've loved watching people start to figure out the medieval mindset and the medieval time period. We've loved hearing our history and creative writing and literature all take off with studies of that time period, as well as our art classes learning about cathedrals and arches and what that means to art and how they thought about things that were beautiful. And we've also got some beautiful medieval music happening in music classes and even in some of our ensembles. And that's just been a really exciting thing to get started with our students this fall. And we are tooling straight into the week of Labor Day already and looking at September and planning big things for our fall semester, including a Christmas show that has that theme. We're very excited about staging that at an area church and just having a great time exploring that musically and probably with some dance as well. Today's podcast kind of centers on that theme. And I'm going to take a quote from C.S. Lewis in one of his essays in Studies in Medieval Literature. This is a quote. "Characteristically, medieval man was an organizer, a codifier, a man of system. His ideal could not be unfairly summed up as a place for everything and everything in its place. Three things are typical of him. First, the small minority of his cathedrals where the design of the architect was actually achieved. Secondly, the Summa of Thomas Aquinas, and thirdly, the Divine Comedy of Dante. In all of these things, we see the tranquil, indefatigable, exultant energy of a passionately logical mind ordering a huge mass of details into unity. They desired unity and proportion, all the classical virtues, but they did have a greater and more varied collection of things to fit in." That's a very verbose phrase, but what he's trying to point out is that in the medieval times, there was a deep passion for things to have order and for things to be logically ordered, but also have beauty. And he points out that one of the big achievements was the Salisbury Cathedral, which actually ended up being built the way the builders started. And if you look that cathedral up and pull up pictures, especially black and white pictures, you can see beautiful pieces of that structure that took so many years to build. It was multi-generational, as most cathedrals were. And there was just a commitment to making things beautiful, even if you didn't get to see the fruit of your work. Being able to say that you had worked on it as your life's work was an accomplishment and something that was valued. And in that same vein, medieval thinkers really believed that there was hierarchy to perception of the world. And so they believed the lowest level of experiencing the world around them was sense perception. So what they could see, hear, taste, smell, touch, that was the lowest form of experience. And then after that, they would layer in the experience with imagination, where they would add the layer of being able to think past what you saw and think about what you could do with that differently, or how that could be interacted with on a different plane. And we definitely see that capability in some animals. If you've ever had a dog and you've been able to watch them sleep, you know that they have dreams. Cats do that. Several animals have been proven to have dreams. And of course, humans have that imaginative capability, but most animals do not even have that capability. They literally only live in the functionality of what their bodies tell them. And then the third level that they would layer in was the layer of reason. And humans, of course, are the only animal on the planet, the only being that has that capability of being able to think logically about a situation or reason out an answer to a problem. We definitely see problem-solving capabilities in certain animals, but not to the level that humans have that. And then the last layer they would suggest is the layer of understanding. And they attributed that only to God, that God was the only one that really understood the world and how it was all supposed to work together, that humans could try and humans could achieve a certain level of that, but at some point they had to give that back to God. And this progression, what we've seen in the modern time, is a progression away from that hierarchy. So in medieval times, they would automatically assume imaginative things were happening, or that the supernatural existed and was piercing the real and the natural at many points in a day or in a year, or certainly over a lifetime. They were not surprised by activity that we would declare as supernatural. They believed that was part of the experience of living on earth. And this progression that we've seen in modern times away from using our imagination to experience the world has led us into making function more important than form. And there's an old phrase that used to suggest that we should follow form over function, or in certain applications, definitely follow form over function, but that there was a marrying of those two values. And in our modern day, I believe we see practicality and realism taking shape, for example, in architecture, and a lot of new buildings that are built, they're built with an eye for function over anything else. They're built with an eye for practicality, and cubism is huge, big, huge square blocks of metal and steel and stone. But the form of it, the beauty of it has been kind of lost. We've left that aside. And we get excited about our technological advances, but we do not. None of us walk around saying those things are beautiful. We can be awed by them in a way, but it's just an awe at what man has been able to achieve. It's not an awe at what beauty we've been able to bring into the world through our own creativity. And these spaces, nobody ever claims that they're warm and inviting or comfortable. They're just proclaimed great because of their function and because of the way they can serve a purpose. The medieval mind looked at the world with the capacity for wonder. They would walk around, literally walk, because they didn't have very many mechanical means of travel. So they would walk most places, and they were always, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but in a general place, people that lived in that time saw appreciation. They had appreciation for things like flocks of geese or birds flying overhead. They would have remarked, if you read their literature or read passages from their poetry, they were very aware of birds and what birds sounded like. And they could usually name what kinds of birds they were hearing at a point in time, because they just lived in the space with the birds a lot. And they spent lots of time outside and on the road and under the sun. And they took time to, on many levels, took time to appreciate that and to proclaim it in their own creativity. And then they would use their time trying to figure out ways to copy that or ways to imitate that. And we just don't do that the same way anymore. And another quote from a different publication of C.S. Lewis, there's a very skinny volume called The Abolition of Man, which is a very powerful look at modern society and specifically education. But this quote is, "We do not look at trees as beautiful objects while we cut them into beams. The first man who did so might have felt the price of that. Virgil and Spencer describe bleeding trees, which might be echoes of that sense of loss. The stars lost their divinity to man as we developed astronomy, and God has no place in our chemical agriculture." Unquote. And what he's pointing out is that we are slowly eliminating the sense of wonder from even how we get our food. We think we can control the harvest. We can control the planting. We can control the way it grows. We control weed propagation. We control everything about how our food gets produced. And at the end, we don't have room for God to work in giving us the rain we need or giving us the things that we desire on a seasonal basis or the things that our body needs. We think we can do better. And what he mentions there about the stars is that stars were seen as divine pinpoints of light from heaven itself. Back in the day. And yet, as we developed astronomy and we started naming them and seeing that they had patterns and forming our own scientific evaluation of their purpose, they lost their wonder for us. And so we can look up and enjoy stars that blink, but we don't have the same sense of affinity for them that they used to. And then back to the first thing he mentioned, trees, when you cut them down and plane them into boards, you're looking at them as a functional tool or a functional thing. And that's not bad inherently, but to lose the wonder at the grain or lose the wonder at the tree itself is a loss. It's not ugly or evil, but it is definitely a loss for us to not be able to see that as a wondering thing, a wonderful thing. The capacity for marveling at the sky or listening to nature or walking in the woods and sniffing all the stages of life and death that are present in that greenery. Experiencing an old cathedral or an old building and letting it wash you in its beauty and awe and point you to God. These have been eroded in our modern times by many things, starting with screens. And I'll just go back and point out that even 100 years ago, TVs were not prevalent. You had radios in some homes. By the 1930s, a lot of people did gather around radios and listen to shows together as groups or as families. But when screens came into play, and we started watching things, something about engaging that sense of sight literally took us away from being able to experience the world the way that man had always done. And when you start bringing in TVs, and now you have, in our day, you have screens in every hand, we don't look around even when we're in the car and observe the beauty running by us at 35 to 75 miles an hour. We're only engaged in our own things. And this leads to another point about this, that in medieval times, all the ways that they experienced the world led them to a sense of community. They had a sense of wonder. They all had senses of purpose, no matter what strata they were in. If they lived in a village, their purpose was to make a daily living and make the things that they needed, but also contribute to many times to the livelihood of the castle that was their protector, or the village itself had its own protection or had its own set of artisans, and they were known for a certain product, and people around them in that community would come together and make those products happen and make them get shipped and help make that a thing. And we have ended up in, especially America, I think, with a sense of individuality, which is good on the surface and serves a lot of purpose, but can be taken way too far, as everything can. And this individuality has been expressed in the way even that we ride in the car. And if you're a mom or a dad and you have several children and you're in the car, the temptation is to let everybody do their own thing, put on headphones, put on a screen. Each person gets to do their own thing. But that kind of individualism really tends to lead them towards isolation. And isolation is not good. It's anti-community. It makes you think you are the end all and be all. It is I believe, one way that the words of the devil in Genesis 3 were fulfilled when he said, you will become like gods. You'll be alone. You'll be on your own, and whatever you want to do will be up to you, and you get to make your own choices. And we're letting children, especially, we as adults are living this too, but children especially are affected by the message that you get to do what you want to do on your own time, and you get to make choices about how you're going to spend your time. And they forget, or they don't ever learn how to relate, how to get along with each other. These aren't things that come automatically, and they don't come quickly. That monthly play date for 2 hours on the playground, or 30 minutes of recess once a day if you happen to go to school, those aren't the way to learn those things. Those don't happen like that. It takes hours and hours. And I think this goes back to why God gave humans a longer incubation period before adulthood. He gave us at least around 25% of our lifespan is spent at home in community with our families. And he did that on purpose. I think it takes us as bearers of his image. We have a lot more to learn about how to live our lives. And when you have children at 5 and 6 and 7 years old who've never been taught how to share a toy or don't know how to connect with others in a two-way conversation, you're looking down a tunnel that leads us away from connection and wonder and meaningful creativity and community. You're looking at a tunnel that leads you into isolation. And that made me remember, that thought made me remember a writer. E.M. Forster was a writer in the late 1800s to early 1900s. I'm not espousing everything he wrote. He wrote some stuff I would never read. But he did have one story called The Machine Stops. And he was living, if you remember, think about it like this. He wrote this story when he was 30. So he wrote it in 1909. And he was living through the age that transitioned from an agricultural community. He lived in England, an agricultural-based society, into a mechanical-based society. So he saw the influx of trains and cars. He saw telephones. He saw the first, he saw a lot of things mechanized. He saw the first telephones. And this story that he wrote was about the ultimate isolationism. And he pictured a world where everyone lived in a room alone. Each person had their own room, and each person had their own food delivered to them at that room by an anonymous being. And then each person had medical care delivered through the ceiling from a medical device that was implanted in the ceiling. So when they interacted with anyone, it was on a wall that had moving pictures on it, which we would, of course, recognize as a screen. He pictured that they interacted with each other on screens. And so if you had a medical need, you would push a button and the medical person would come on the screen and talk to you about your what you were experiencing and what symptoms. And then your medical, whether it was medicine or medical stuff, would get delivered to you through the ceiling of your room, and you just took care of it. And you would have meetings on the screen with people from all around the world in their own holes, talking about topics that seemed important, but everyone lived totally isolated. And they were all, in his story, they were all sustained by a machine that also delivered oxygen and water. And then one day the machine stopped. And there's more to the story, so it's not all fatalistic, but the picture that he drew of everyone in their own room doing their own thing all the time, and yet being terribly lonely and hardly having the words to describe that, was very prescient, because I do believe I see some of what he was talking about, and his is an extreme version, of course, but I see that kind of lack of community, and yet pretending like we have community because we have it on a screen, is something that's very real right now. Barely 100 years, 115 years after he wrote the story, it's very real. And the thought that he could see that coming simply because he saw carriages replaced by cars and telephones replacing face-to-face contact, and things becoming mechanized. If you read much of J.R. Tolkien's work or C.S. Lewis's fiction work, you see the same kinds of themes. They saw that coming. They were born in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they saw it coming. And we're fulfilling it in kind of a devastatingly sad way when we withdraw from actual community and face-to-face interaction, and we especially with our families, we let our families become consumed by screen time and everyone doing their own thing. So these are some heavier thoughts, but I love the way that the medievals really had community and let beauty wash into their lives, and experienced the joy of just nature around them, and viewed the presence of God as real and interactive because of the way they lived that. And that's something we can choose to do today. So that's just one way the medieval society comes to bear today. And hopefully this is something you tuck away and think about this week, and have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining us today. To support this podcast, please go follow us on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're interested in knowing more about the work of Peachtree, please go visit our website at peachtreelearningcenter.com for more information.